Wonderful. Thank you. Got it. Excellent. Thank you for that. So, welcome everybody. I am Sarah Johnson, and this is Trauma Informed Responses to Challenging Behaviors. This is one of our offerings for Resilient Winona County. And this is going to be recorded and offered asynchronously. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Resilient Winona County is a collaborative in our Winona County area, and we are really working to increase the resilience of our community and county as a whole. We all have a role in that, and part of this work is learning about what does that mean, learning about trauma and its prevalence and what that means for how we might respond as caring humans, as neighbors, as informal supports, and in some cases formal supports. And as a part of that, then how do we build resilience? Spoiler alert, one of the ways that we build resilience is we connect with others and we connect with skills. And that is what we're all about today during this hour. As I mentioned, this webinar is being recorded for future public use. That is what that means is we're going to be sharing this out, and we hope that you do as well. So you all will be getting the link to this recording. And my hope actually with today's training is that for you all attending, you may want to use this as a training tool for folks that you work with or community partners. So I'm hoping that that is something that's useful for you. Some of you may be interested in continuing education units, CEUs. For those who are interested and who need that for your job, we will have a separate post quiz that we'll be sending out. And that's going through our partner, Winona State University, through their adult continuing education department. And we're really thankful to them for partnering with us. We are offering a limited number of those for free. So if you do not need continuing education units, please just take the checkout form. We'll make sure you know the difference between the two. So if you do need the continuing ed, please use the post quiz. And if you don't, use the checkout and we'll let you know more about that. So to introduce you to who I am, I'm Sarah Johnson, otherwise known as the Joy Labs. And I am a partner. I absolutely love working with Resilient Winona County. Some of my nearest and dearest partners are a part of that collaborative. Many of you are on this call already. So it makes me very happy to be here connecting with you, even in this virtual space, even for those of you who are watching it later after the fact. The Joy Labs are me and now all of you, because there's no one recipe for joy. We have to experiment and try new things to see what works with us and to see what works when interacting and engaging with other people. So really asking you to bring a spirit of curiosity and playfulness and hopefully some joy as we embark on what's complicated work, right? Like engaging with humans, being a human, that's complicated because we're complicated creatures. So to try to really help it feel less daunting and overwhelming, let's just play. Let's experiment together. Let's see what works. My intention during our time together is to offer us time and space to learn together. I am going to be doing a lot more talking than I often do, as this is a virtual setting, and some of you aren't even going to be on this webinar with me at the same time. So I am going to offer you and try to cram in quite a bit of information, really starting with a foundation around what are we even talking about with trauma-informed practices or trauma-informed care. So I use those interchangeably. The whole point of this is really to do a level set, making sure we in the community are speaking shared language. And that can really allow us to begin really increasing our positive impact and our effectiveness at caring for ourselves and each other. This is dynamic work. You're not going to get it all today. It's really to give that baseline, hopefully a few super concrete, tangible tools that you can take with you and share with others. So our objectives for today. My hope is that you leave this session with increased knowledge about how common trauma is, and how resilience is built. We're not going to take a deep dive, but I want you to have at least a baseline understanding of that. I'd like you to also leave understanding that this is really dynamic work, meaning we're going to be constantly learning and growing. And so hopefully if you're somebody who's a pro at this already and has quite a bit of knowledge and training in trauma-informed practices, maybe you simply leave with just a kind of spark of maybe something that's a reminder of something you can do, or maybe even a small little new tool or something that you can share with others. Certainly for those of you who are new to this work, I'm hoping that this comes as a empowering session and something that helps you feel like, okay, this is complicated and I got this. I've got people who've got my back. I know that there's others who are going to help me keep learning and growing in this area. Also, in terms of our objectives, my hope is that you can leave able to describe at least one strategy for responding in a trauma-informed way to challenging behaviors in others. So at least one strategy. I think I've crammed quite a few in. Our time together generally, I'd like to, once I get through this piece, help you arrive. So you are here in the virtual space or you've turned on the webinar. I want to give you a chance to like emotionally get here, spiritually get here, cognitively get here. Going to give you an overview of trauma and resilience. We can't talk about trauma without talking about resilience. So we'll be talking about both of those things. That includes some definitions around what that is, what trauma-informed practice is. Then we'll dive into something called co-regulation using a framing called the window of tolerance. Then I always like to give some time for taking it with you, meaning giving you a chance to take a look at what are the top things that you're going to walk away with. What do you need to be able to enact those, or like take those things and you start using them right away, and or where might you need some more practice? Who can help you with that? Who can help in growing your training and knowledge? So, got you through the initial stuff. And now I'd like to arrive with you. What I mean by arriving is getting settled, getting grounded, and making sure that your brain is ready to learn. It's the end of a day, it's a Monday, the sun has come out. I don't know what day you're watching it if you're watching the webinar, but I'm assuming you have a life outside of this webinar. And so lots of things that may be distracting you and pulling you from paying attention. So before we even get into any content at all, I want to give you an opportunity to get here, in quotes. So I'm going to invite you to just find a position where you feel comfortable and you feel ready to take in information. And the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is acknowledge that the topic that we're talking about tonight, trauma-informed responses, the very first word of the title of this webinar is the word trauma. And so I want to really acknowledge, and I'm touching my heart because I'm sending out some strength and some compassion and just some general good energy to you around the fact that this is a tough topic. And we know that trauma is common. Spoiler alert, that's one of the objectives that we're going to be talking about here. But what that means to me is that trauma lives probably in any space that we enter, whether that be a webinar like this one, or the spaces in which we work. So rec centers and libraries and schools and parks, right? Like anywhere we enter in the community, a grocery store, the places where we worship, on the pickleball court, right? Like in all of those spaces, there are humans, which means in all of those spaces, in all likelihood, people are coming with a history of trauma. And in all likelihood, a history of resilience and healing and recovery. We may be all over the place on that spectrum though, so I want to just really make space for you as we talk about this topic and as you continue to learn about this topic and as you bring these strategies and these principles out into your work with other humans to remember that you're a human first and that your own history, your own experiences, of course, inform how you are and how you show up. And so sometimes that means we need to take care of ourselves. And so if at any point on this webinar you need to just pause and maybe space out a little bit or move around or take a drink of water, check out, press pause, press pause and then come back to the recording, that is completely fine. And in fact, what I encourage you to do. So please care for yourself. The next thing I'd have you think about by way of arrival is, how charged is your battery? So I invited you to find a position and a posture. And so I invited you then to notice, just this acknowledgement that this can be difficult work, some tenderness around that. Now I'm going to invite you to kind of check in with yourself and tune in like, if my own personal battery charge, not your phone, you as a human, had a battery charge of 1 through 5, with 1 being barely any juice, I'm at the end of my battery charge, 5 being I'm fully charged, ready to go, ready to learn, like here for it. So on a 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5, reflect for yourself, what's your battery charge? And for those of you on the webinar who can respond in the chat, if you would throw that in the chat, I would love to see your battery charge. So 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Got a couple of 3s coming in, 3.5, 3, a lot of 3s coming in. So a 2, a 2.5. Great honesty, great noticing everybody. Got a 4 coming in, a lot of 2s, 2.5s, 3s. Okay, this is not unexpected at the end of a Monday. I would be really surprised if you were all 5s. Now, for those of you who are watching the webinar, you might be watching at a time where your charge is higher. Why do you suppose I'm having you think about your battery charge? I'll have somebody maybe throw in the chat why it might be valuable to notice your battery charge before we do anything. Go ahead and throw that in the chat if you have an idea. And I'm going to move us to the next slide while somebody's answering in the chat. My last piece of arrival and grounding for you is just tuning in beyond your battery charge. Maybe settling in, maybe taking a deep breath. Yep, Terry, I love that. Ability to process and be present, attending and active listening. These are great reasons to check your battery charge, right? Like if we're not noticing where we are, we might hop onto a call and just space out the entire time and not get anything out of it. Yes, I love that. We might not bring our whole self. These are great answers in the chat there. So taking into account where your battery charge is, where you are in space right now, maybe taking into account that this can be a difficult topic. Maybe notice, what does your body need to be able to learn? Would it be helpful to stand up? Would it be helpful to put yourself in a strong posture for a moment? Ta-da! Whew, ta-da! Shake it off a little bit. Would it help to take a drink of water? And if you need to, go grab a drink of water before we get started. For those of you who are watching the webinar, you can pause and do that. For those of you on the call, go ahead, move around if you need to, bounce up and down, do the things that are going to help your brain be ready to learn. So, as we did those 3 arrivals, why do you suppose it might be helpful that we start our session off taking a look at that? So I asked you about the battery charge. What about acknowledging or thinking or talking about trauma can be tough? What about checking in on how you're ready to learn? Would one person be willing to unmute and share, why do you think this could be a useful thing? But even more so, how might you apply this in your work with other people? Maybe your work with young people, maybe even outside areas like your actual personal life. Anyone willing to hop off and answer that? Feel free to throw it in the chat.
It's important when you're working with kids that have issues like I do to enter every situation with an open heart and an open mind. I think
Ooh,
that's where I come from when I work with my kids.
I love that. So entering each situation with an open heart and an open mind. I'm seeing some hand claps on that and hearts on that. Yeah, I love that. Because if we can come in with an open heart, we are able to bring empathy, even in situations where a behavior might be challenging, it might be strange to us, confusing to us, maybe even downright irritating to us, right? But if our open heart can go, wait a minute, we're here to bring compassion, we're here to bring empathy, that can help us tune into that open head, which might, that open mind might help us go, wait a minute, there might be more going on with this person than meets the eye. Their behavior is probably communicating something to me. Am I hearing you? Am I representing that right, Wendy?
Absolutely.
Awesome. I love that. Anyone else want to chime in? How might you apply this in your work to young people or in other areas? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up, so I'm going to move to the next slide. I'd encourage you to think about, is there a way that you might actually use one, two, or three of those tools that we just went through? Could you bring them to a team meeting? Could you use them in opening circle at the beginning of your day or when you come back from lunch?
Hey,
So just,
Sarah,
oh yeah.
it's
And
Ann. Hi.
hi, Anne. Hi.
Um, I find it's really important before entering into working with folks and greeting people for the day, when recognizing the energy that I might have, I tend to take more deep breaths if I feel my nerves feeling a little rattled, so that the person that I'm interacting with isn't picking up on and mistaking my low energy for the way that I feel towards them.
I love that. So you're doing a couple of things there, and you're describing modeling taking deep breaths as a way to regulate our nervous system. You're above and beyond star. We're going to get to that very thing towards the farther into this webinar, but you're also sharing that like the way we show up has an impact on other people, and if we're showing up and not in a great space, that might have an impact on that person's experience, what they see.
Yeah.
Love that. Thank you. I'm seeing in the chat too. This is awesome. Children, youth, all humans need to feel comfortable and safe sharing without judgment. This is important in sharing any type of trauma experience. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I will make sure to say a couple of times in this webinar, we're not going to be sharing any specific details about trauma. In fact, I advise against that. That is not a trauma-informed practice, but even just the word trauma can be something that causes people some discomfort. And so I just want to make sure that we're being, like I said, gentle around that. We will not be asking anyone to share any specific details. So thank you for that in the chat. That's a great comment. I'm going to start moving us into our content. The takeaways that I hope you leave here. So the concepts that I built this slide deck around is that trauma is common and it impacts different people in different ways. Humans are resilient, and there are many things we can do to build resilience in ourselves and others. And behavior is communication. So these are the concepts that we're going to be building out. Again, this training will be really foundational, and I'm hoping that in our subsequent trainings that we'll have coming up, we'll be building off of these concepts. So being trauma informed, let's start there. Trauma is common and impacts different people in different ways. So let's build that concept out by first starting with definitions. So What am I talking about when I talk about trauma? I'm talking about the experience that results from exposure to an experience or a circumstance, maybe a series of events, or something that causes us to be scared for our lives, essentially, experiencing it as life threatening. So, this might be an exposure to something that happens one time. This might be an ongoing exposure. And we'll talk in a little more detail what I mean about that in just a moment. So, when we talk about trauma, we're talking about the experience resulting from an exposure to something frightening and perceived as life threatening. Being trauma informed, then you may have heard of, like, well, what does it mean to be trauma informed? What it means is having an understanding of the science of trauma and resilience. Doesn't mean you have to be an expert. It means that you have a basic concept of the fact that trauma is common and that impacts our lives, that impacts how we show up, that impacts our health. And so, as individuals and organizations who are wanting to respond in trauma informed ways, that means the empathy that we bring that is based on the science that leads us to the actions that we take. So, being trauma informed or trauma informed practice or trauma informed care, sometimes known as TIC or TIP, trauma informed practice is TIP, and trauma informed care is TIC. Those are the actions that we take as a result of that knowledge. So, when we think about trauma, as I mentioned, we're not talking about and we're not asking people about the specific details of their experience. Rather, we are coming with the knowledge that because trauma is common, we need to account for the fact that maybe some of the behaviors that we're seeing that are confusing might be as a result of trauma. They might be from something else. They might be because somebody skipped lunch or they're dealing with some stress or difficulty that's really impacting them, right? So it may not be trauma, but it might be. And so, to be safe, we are bringing empathy and that knowledge that it could be to our actions. So, talking a little more detail about what we're talking about with trauma. So, adverse childhood experiences. In the late 90s, there was research that was done that really shed light on how common adverse childhood experiences, otherwise known as the difficult things that people experience in their childhood, so 18 and under, and just really brought to light that there are a lot of commonalities and that the sorts of things that are kind of the main buckets of those adverse childhood experiences that are very common are instability in homes. So that may include a parent or a caregiver who is struggling with mental health issues or struggling with substance use disorder, or divorce, relationship instability. Other forms of adverse childhood experiences may be abuse or neglect. So, in that very early 1990s research, those were the 10 things that were, these are the buckets of the 10 things, the things that were really came to light as very common. Important to know is that subsequent research has shown that toxic stress, which is caused by racism and other forms of marginalization, so poverty, violence, discrimination, othering, toxic stress that results from those sorts of things has the exact same kind of effects. So when we talk about adverse childhood experiences, really expanding beyond that initial research of just housing instability, abuse, and neglect to include other forms of marginalization like racism, transphobia, homophobia, those sorts of things have an impact. So I want to unpack toxic stress because toxic stress is the thing here. So toxic stress can be caused by marginalization. Toxic stress can also be experienced when we are dealing with chronic instability in our housing. So that uncertainty of, are we going to remain safe in our home? Are we going to be able to stay in our home? Do we have a safe neighborhood? Do we know where our food is going to come from? Right? So there are many experiences that if we are not able to protect people, so buffer people from that stress, it can become what's called toxic stress. Stress is normal, toxic stress is dangerous. Normal stress helps us be healthy, it helps motivate us. When it becomes toxic, that's when it starts having impacts on our health. We'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. So just to give you a little bit of a sense of the prevalence of how common it is, so at least 64% of people report experiencing at least one type of ACE. So on a ACE score with a maximum of 10, over half of us report at least one, and almost a fifth of us report 4 or more. So it's quite common. It's quite common. Important to know is that having ACEs does not mean you're doomed, because there's lots of things we can do to build resilience and to support healing and recovery. It is helpful to know if you have higher ACE scores, because the higher the ACE score, the greater the likelihood you may be seeing some ongoing health difficulties. And we'll talk more about that in a moment, which means the more knowledge you have, the more we can do to help support people. So important to know that if you have a number of ACEs, there are things we can do. When we look at ACEs across the population, ACEs are common, and some groups have a greater likelihood of having had experience with ACEs. This slide speaks to that. If we think about this as our health is made up of way, way, way more than just, do I put cheese on everything I eat or not, right? Do I go to the Y and, exercise once or twice or regularly? Like that, those things are influences on our health, but way, way, way more are the things that our community can help us be supported in, meaning how we're treated with dignity and with a sense of belonging and connection, a sense of agency in our communities, being able to have quality education, being able to have stable, livable income, being able to be treated well, right? So all of those things have an impact on our health and on our resilience. So I want to specifically call out racial trauma and define that. So when we talk about racial trauma, I mentioned that a little bit when we're talking about toxic stress and how that fits into ACEs more generally. Racial trauma is the mental and emotional injury that's caused by encounters or experiences with racial bias, ethnic discrimination, racism, and hate crimes. So as we think about an exposure to trauma that is a one-time trauma, is one way that we experience impacts, negative impacts from trauma. Another way is that ongoing exposure to trauma, for example, with racism, that can cause that kind of ongoing toxic stress response. We know that racism drives inequities in all of the things that have an impact on our health, and that because of that, there's a direct relationship between racism and mental and physical health outcomes. There could be many, many more webinars that we do specifically on this topic, but I want to make sure that we are covering that as we are talking about this foundation to talking about trauma-informed practices. So the impact of ACEs and toxic stress, we can see those impacts on our physical health. So the quality of our life, the length of our life can be impacted if we are not able to protect people from toxic stress and intervene to promote healing and recovery. We can also see emotional impacts, so the way we feel about ourselves. So some of these impacts might be kind of invisible and something that we experience internally. So feelings of self-doubt or shame or guilt, feelings of disconnection or numbness. We also might experience relational difficulties as it relates to toxic stress. And that might be, as I think about the topic here of challenging behaviors, that may be where we may be seeing that impact through relational difficulties, through communication difficulties. So we really want to note that some of the impacts we may not be able to see. It may be coming out in these what we call externalizing behaviors. So behaviors that we can observe. And if we are not bringing our empathy lens, we may mistake this for quote unquote misbehavior or quote unquote defiance, right? What that might be indicating is that someone is feeling unsafe or has not had safe relationships in which they can practice healthy communication. So it may be coming out, I like to call it crooked, might be coming out crooked in ways that are not as effective. So I also mentioned that an important concept today is that humans are resilient and there are things we can do to build that resilience. So touching on resilience, resilience is our ability to adapt, cope, and thrive despite tough and challenging experiences. We don't need resilience if everything is fine, right? There's no need to adapt if everything's going well. Instead, when life throws us tough stuff, our ability to adapt in the face of that tough thing and be able to manage and respond in ways that don't make things worse, but make things better, so that we're able to have healthy coping and able to thrive, that is what's called resilience. Resilience is grown through connection, and there's many kinds, including personal, cultural resilience, economic resilience, social resilience, community resilience. We're focusing here on personal and community resilience, and know that the more resilient each of us are, the more resilient our communities will be, meaning we all benefit from focusing on resilience, especially the resilience of those who are struggling most in our community. We all benefit from that because that brings, what's that quote? Rising tide raises all ships. So we all do better when we do better, when we all do better. So I want to share this quote with you. This is a youth development leader on being trauma informed. To be able to serve and welcome all, we need to be trauma informed. High tide, there it is, a high tide raises all ships. These practices support all people, no matter what level of trauma or no trauma that they have experienced. So I mentioned we cannot talk about trauma without talking about resilience and talking about the flip side of adverse childhood experiences is positive childhood experiences. And another thing called hope, otherwise known as health outcomes through positive experiences. So in all likelihood, the people on this call are building these positive childhood experiences with the people in your homes, with the people in your neighborhoods, and the people that you serve in your organizations every day. Those things that you do nurture resilience and increase the protective factors, meaning the things that help buffer us from toxic stress. So when we think about positive childhood experiences, those things fall into the buckets of support, offering support to people, building a sense of belonging. So not just saying that people belong or are included, but actually truly helping people see and have that felt sense of I belong here. I am a part of co-creating this space. I am valued in this space. Safety is another important piece to building those positive childhood experiences, both physical safety. You know, I know that you're talking in your organizations about reducing the risk of any kinds of falls or injuries, right? Injury prevention. You're also talking about how do we protect people and young people in particular from child abuse and that kind of thing. We're also talking then about emotional safety when we're talking about positive childhood experiences. How do we help people have that felt sense of safety, knowing that safety is different for all of us? So I'm going to pause just on this one for a moment and invite you in the chat to share, how are you already building in a sense of support, belonging, or safety in the work that you do, or as you engage with others? So I'm going to invite you in the chat, or if you're watching the webinar, maybe pause for a moment and chat with other people if you're watching it with other people, or self-reflect and take some notes. How are you already building support, belonging, and safety in your interactions with youth or with others? I'm going to keep going on the slides while you type in the chat or do your self-reflection. As I mentioned, resilience is grown through connection. And so we're going to move into talking about trauma-informed care, otherwise known as those empathic actions that we take. Yes, oh, I'm seeing things coming in already. Fidget toys at every meeting are a way to meet people where they're at, give people that sense of safety. It can be a good, healthy distraction. Signature practices to start meetings and gatherings to help individuals connect, ground, and be heard. I love that example. So we don't just dive into the content of a meeting, we let people kind of arrive and get here so that we're able to take in and process and be our best selves. So moving into trauma-informed practices, essentially what trauma-informed care or trauma-informed practices are how we show up for each other. So I want to share this, more quotes from other youth development leaders. So mindsets of trauma-informed practices, things like being a good listener and learner by bringing curiosity and that open, positive mind. It makes me think of that open mind and open heart that we talked about at the beginning. Bringing empathy. So that also means you believe what you hear from other people, right? Like their experience is meaningful. So listening to how people perceive. Bringing that growth mindset of knowing that it can be complicated working with people, and what you did with the last 10 people might have worked. Next person that you encounter maybe doesn't work with. And that's why we need to continue to grow and learn and be able to be adaptive in our work. Looking at nothing about me without me. So how do we co-create? How do we include voice and choice? Meaning, how do we have people be a part of creating solutions that impact them instead of creating them or just making decisions unilaterally? I love this one. Approach attention seeking as connection seeking. So if we think about resilience is built through connection, and sometimes the puzzling behaviors that we see are a result of somebody having had their sense of connection injured through some sort of trauma, so that the behavior that they're bringing is their effort at connection. It may be that we just need to help them come up with a way of seeking connection that is more direct or is more clear to others, or that doesn't endanger them or doesn't have risk of putting people off or really disconnecting. I love this work and I'm so excited that you're here, and I'm going to try to move through the content knowing that we're not going to get to everything in the slide deck today. So trauma-informed practice is dynamic, meaning it changes and shifts. It's not the same with every single person that you meet, because it's contextual and relational, meaning depending on the context in which you're in. Are you in your home, somebody else's home? Are you at the work, in your workplace? Are you at the grocery store? Like, where is the context in which this thing is happening? And what's your relationship with this person? Do you know them deeply? Are you their mentor? Are you the adult in their life who's there keeping them safe and like trying to help guide them? Are you a stranger and you have this opportunity to engage with someone that you don't know very well in a caring way that would look really different than if you had a really deep relationship with someone? Excuse me. Here's another quote from a youth serving leader. I used to think we would reach trauma-informed status. Now I know that it's dynamic, ever changing. There's always more to learn and more research coming out. Excuse me as I have a tickle in my throat. Moving into our next section. Behavior is communication. Another youth serving leader, in their wisdom, said, "We used to address these behaviors as problems. Now we try to understand this as communication because it means we can better meet individual needs. Instead of trying to apply one size fits all, we can apply interventions that are going to work more specifically based on what's going on with that human." So I want to offer you a way of thinking about dysregulated behavior, otherwise known as behavior that might be challenging, behavior that might be confusing, behavior that might be labeled as quote unquote misbehavior or defiance, right? Dysregulation is a way of thinking about this. And as we think about as youth serving leaders and as humans who are serving other humans, who love other humans, who interact with and engage with other humans, both professionally and personally, the best way we can provide care to others is through what's known co-regulation. So let me give you a couple of definitions. Self-regulation are the life skills we use and develop throughout our lifetime through relationships and experience and through practicing these skills. Essentially, what that means is when we notice our battery charge is low, when we notice that we're not in a learning mode, maybe that's because we're anxious or overtired. Maybe it's because we're sad or we're angry or we're frustrated. When we become dysregulated, we're sitting more in our big feelings, is a way I like to describe it to the littles. So more in our feelings than in our more connected brain, where we can bring both our feelings and our more logical brain. Self-regulation are the skills like sitting back in our seat, taking a breath when we hear a chime, tuning into our emotions and our thoughts, maybe taking a break, maybe shaking it off, maybe taking a drink of water. All of those are self-regulation skills we can use through the course of our day so that we're able to help others through co-regulation, meaning sharing. So Anne's example of taking deep breaths while talking to someone is a great co-regulating example. If I'm taking deep breaths, that's an invitation for the person I'm engaging with to also begin co-regulating and bringing that dysregulation down. If I'm entering in that conversation, speaking loudly, big, and I'm breathing really short, I may accidentally co-dysregulate, which nobody's happy in that situation. So we really want to bring our best self by noticing when we're dysregulated, noticing when we're out of what's known as our window of tolerance, so that we can bring that regulated, co-regulatory person to that interaction. So Dr. Dan Siegel has coined this term of window of tolerance. It's a way to help us understand how our nervous systems respond to stress, the stress of being alive and the stress of being a human. So in the center in our green is where we would all love to be all of our life, open, active, aware, calm, ready to take in stress. It doesn't necessarily mean that we are not frustrated or angry. It means that we are within our ability to be frustrated or angry or struggle and still be able to respond in a way that other people can hear, versus in hyper arousal, when we're so wound up, whether that's angry, anxious, stressed out, that we're not really able to communicate very well. We have all been here. We have all been here many times. Maybe some of you are in this space right now, right? So this is when we send the email that we regret, or say the thing that we regret, or we're not in a great space. Essentially, we're in fight or flight space and we're not ready to learn. In hypoarousal, that's kind of the opposite end, where we're so overwhelmed that we're just numbed out, zoned out. We're in freeze mode in that situation and not in a place to learn. We all experience these states. We've all been there. Sometimes we're in all three of those states during the course of a given day, depending on what's going on. It simply means we're alive and that our nervous system is trying to protect us. So I would ask you in the chat, or maybe if you're watching again, you pause and you do some self-reflection or chat with someone next to you. How can you recognize signs of hyper or hypoarousal in yourself? And how might you recognize that in your participants? So for example, if you work in preschool or child watch, maybe you would notice it in yourself if you're getting a little irritated with the kiddos. That might be a sign you're in hyperarousal, right? Good time to take some breaths, do some grounding, maybe tag team with your coworker so that you can get yourself well regulated and back in your window of tolerance. How might you notice it in a childcare setting with your participants? You may well see it or experience it with a child running away, right? Hyperarousal, running away may look quote unquote naughty, but that may be indicating that a child is feeling unsafe or is just in that extra energy mode and unable to regulate themselves. Hypoarousal in your space, if we still use that same example of childcare, that could be seeing a kiddo who's putting their hood on or not participating or particularly quiet, right? That could be a sign that that child is in hypo. And I see in the chat, yeah, can notice it in yourself, feeling it in your heartbeat. Absolutely. If you're able to tune into your heartbeat, you may notice when it's going really fast, that's probably a sign of hyper. When it's going super slow, that might be a hypo. So I'm going to share with you some strategies for widening your window of tolerance. And these, spoiler alert, are strategies that you can use with other people as well. So the stronger and more consistent our self-care practices are, in other words, the things like brushing your teeth, getting sleep, fueling up with good foods, moving your body, connecting with other people, like all of those things can help us build a strong foundation and help us widen our window of tolerance, meaning we're able to tolerate greater levels of stress in our day-to-day life. Leaning on supports, asking for help when we need it. All of these are things that we can be modeling so that we are teaching them to the people that we're serving. Hyperarousal, some of you may know some of these things and maybe doing some of these already. I'll invite you in the chat. If you have strategies to manage when you're getting way up here in hyperarousal and you're not seeing them in the list, you can add those in the chat. What are things that help you slow your breathing down? Sometimes it's breaking a sweat. Sometimes it's like, okay, I'm just going to tune in. Okay, I can smell the flowers on my desk. I'm looking at the sparkly sticker on my thing. I am touching the cool surface of the table. So whatever your 5 senses are, you can tune into 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 of them. You can do a body scan. I'm seeing fidget toys in the chat. It's a great example. Getting out, touching grass, as the gamers say. So contact with nature can help us bring that level of hyperarousal down. Whereas hypoarousal, we're really trying to kind of kickstart again, which means we may need to really shrink the challenge, meaning small things. You can add in the chat too what you do to help with hypoarousal. Trying to start with one thing at a time instead of 3 things at a time or 20 things at a time, right? So first I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this. I love that example in the chat. Walks is a great example for actually both hyper and hypo. They can get us started. A hypoarousal walk might be a stroll, whereas a hyperarousal walk might be a power walk. So you can experiment, here's the laboratory again, to see what works for you and with those that you serve. So briefly, I just want to share this slide. I'm going to keep this in the deck. So when this gets sent out to you, I'm going to encourage you to take some time with the slide deck and in particular, maybe a few of the slides that we didn't get to or in some depth. And that is just noticing that in the window of tolerance, we can really work to build, to reduce the risk of challenging behavior by really building safe and predictable environments. So helping people know very clearly what to expect in that environment and helping people be successful in that environment. Unconditional positive regard and belonging, that just means really bringing that empathy and that sense of everybody is an important person. And I bring my care to you and my respect to you, no matter what your behavior is. I care about you as a human, is unconditional positive regard. Ooh, I'm seeing music too. Alpha waves for hyper to settle and focus. That's great. Great for those of us with ADHD. Yes, that's a great example. I use delta waves to go to sleep too. So that helps me, I think, with my hyper. So great. You may also notice on this slide in particular that the things that we need in all of these environments are safety. So the more we can build safety in emotional safety and physical safety by validating people's experience, knowing that what's safe to you may feel unsafe to someone else. So how do we validate people's experience and give them an opportunity to co-regulate with us? And then once they're back in their window of tolerance, being able to process through so that we can help create a safer space for them in the future. I'm seeing lots of great in the chat. So hypo has always looked like not having enough time or space to process what's happening inside and having a hard time verbalizing or paying attention. Yes, combating this by taking quiet moment to digest and recharge the processing communication battery. That is such a great example. So it's like you looked at the next slide, which means we're only ready to learn once we're in our window of tolerance. So to that chat comment, there's beautiful. We really want to work on co-regulation in hyper and hypo so that we can bring us back into that window of tolerance. So I'm beginning to speak quickly because I know our time is coming to an end here, and I want to get to all of our slides here to make sure you know what to expect, what's coming next. So I'm giving you the answer to this question. How might the window of tolerance concept help us to apply trauma-informed practices? Well, first, we need to focus on connection before anything. Connection needs to be the foundation of what we do with humans because that helps us co-regulate. Take in action then, applying the window of tolerance can be looking at, okay, there's this puzzling behavior in front of me. And I'm bringing my trauma-informed lens of this might be indicating that maybe this person has experienced trauma. It may be indicating that they're just overtired or underfed, underfueled, right? Maybe they're having a hard day. So what this means is that I need to bring empathy and some of the strategies for managing hyper and hypo so that I can bring that connection before we get to content. So what might help me with my knowledge of trauma-informed practices in the window of tolerances, and what might hinder, what might make it worse? What are my next steps in responding based on that information and my knowledge? And then what happens after that, right? So next steps are probably co-regulating activities. And the next step is when we might process that. And I'm going to offer you a tool in here, a problem-solving worksheet that is the how do I respond right now, which is the co-regulating. And then when we're ready to have that conversation, when we're back in the window of tolerance, the what comes next is how do I use this as something to help me the next time I'm dysregulated, right? How can I help support you the next time you're dysregulated? The what comes next is how we learn from our experiences. So briefly, our takeaways before we hop off this call. Trauma is common and impacts different people in different ways. Humans are very resilient, and there's so many things we can do to build resilience, no matter where you are in the lifespan, a child or an adult. There are many things we can do to build our resilience. And behavior is important as a communication tool. We might not understand what it means, but if we can bring our empathic, trauma-informed lens, that can help us go, okay, maybe we need to slow down together and figure out how to make sure this person feels safe so that we can then address and learn new ways of being more effective in our and successful in our space. As always, a really important takeaway is ask for help when you need it. You can be in touch with us if you need to. There's also national resources. If you are unaware, any time of the day or night, you can call or text 988 and get a hold of a caring, trained person there to help. There's also a Hope line. You can text HOPE to 741-741 any time of the day or night to receive a caring, trained individual. Some of the resources that are takeaways, this problem solving plan. So you will be able to click in the speaker notes and get all kinds of goodies in this workshop. You also will get the learning guide. So especially for those of you who are in leadership positions, supervising others, this might be a very useful thing for you to use with your teams to make sure that everybody's getting the content. So that is there for you, as well as, the mental health promotion activities for youth. This is something we covered in a previous session. There's an activation guide that will give you all that you need to know to immediately activate using these everyday coping skills to support that learning and growth on a day-to-day basis. Also, one last thing, there is a how-to mental health video series for teens and young adults. For those of you working with teens, you will have the link in there with the activation guide for that. I want to give you an opportunity as you begin leaving the call in just a moment here of what you're going to take away from this conversation. Feel free to throw this in the chat, or if you're watching this on your own, write a reflection. What are your next steps with your takeaway, and who else can help support you with this? I would love to see in the chat what you're planning to take away or what you will take away from this conversation. My hope is whether you were here in person or watched it in online, that you consider carving out some time, maybe even 15 minutes, once you get the slide deck, to take a look at that and see if there's things that you want to practice or learn more about. These will be going out to you as well. There's a post quiz only for those of you who registered for the continuing ed. There's a checkout form for everyone else. Marcy will be sending that out, so I'm not going to stay on that because I want to get to the thank you. We will stop recording in just a moment, and I will stay on the call if you have any questions for me. But before we do that, I want to make sure I also say goodbye to the people who are watching the recording. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much to all of you. I'm seeing others on this call who I know, the more the merrier. Notice my window of tolerance. These are great takeaways from this call. My hope is that we can continue to build community. Our next Resilient Winona County will be in person, and more information will be coming soon on that. Thank you for all you do to care for yourself and our communities. Please be in touch with questions. And as I said, Marcy, you'll stop recording here in a moment. I'll stop sharing my slide deck, and I'll stay on the call if you have any questions or comments for me. Maybe we all want to wave if you are okay turning your